They believed a closed fist was the only answer. Admiral Eva Rostova watched the ultimatum timer bleed seconds away on the main tactical display. It was a stark crimson font against the cool blues of the Aegis system map, a digital wound counting down to a promise of violence. Below it, the symbol of the Krathan hegemony. A clenched gauntlet pulsed softly, a constant, arrogant reminder of their terms. Surrender the civilian convoy retreat beyond the quarantine line and submit to hegemony inspection or face total annihilation. The clock read 0:45:13. Her command ship, the UNF Vigilance, sat at the heart of the Third Fleet, a silent testament to a different philosophy. They were an anchor against the tide, not a hammer to shatter it. Status. Archie, she said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the tension coiling in the command deck's recycled air. The slight scent of ozone from the primary conduits was a familiar companion in these moments. The Krathan fleet holds its blockade position. Admiral, the synthesized voice of Archimedes, the fleet mind replied. His vocal print was modeled on Rostova's own mentor, a steady baritone that could soothe or command with equal precision. 37 heavy cruisers, 112 support frigates. All weapon ports are open. Their doctrine is inflexible. Probability of attack at timer expiration remains 99.9 recurring. Beside her, Executive Officer Kenji Tanaka clenched his jaw, the muscle a taut line beneath his skin. 99.9 is a distinction without a difference. They want a fight. The glare from his console highlighted the stark set of his features, a man honed for action, not for waiting. Rostova's gaze remained on the screen on the path of the convoy vessels, creeping toward the blockade. They carried atmospheric processors and medical supplies for the fledgling colony on Viridian 4, a world still gasping for its first full breath. The stakes were not military. They were existential. Our mandate is to teach first Kenji, to demonstrate that an open hand is not a weak one. You do not debate a hammer, you redirect it. And if the lesson fails, Tanaka countered, his voice low, then the ledger must be balanced. Rostova said, a chill creeping into her tone. The faint vibration of the ship's inertial dampeners was the only physical sign of the immense power held in check around them. But we balance it our way. On board the convoy freighter, Star Treader, a little girl named Ilara pressed her hands against the cool plasteel of the viewport. The distant lights of the Krathan blockade were like angry, unblinking stars. Why are they trying to stop us? Mama, she asked, her breath fogging a small circle on the pane. Her mother knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. They're afraid, sweetie. They think everyone sees the universe the way they do as something to be conquered. The Admiral is showing them another way. Ilara looked from the angry stars to the steady silver lights of the Vigilance. She's teaching them, her mother nodded. That's the hope. The human fleet began to move, but not in the way the Krathan expected. Small, unassuming drones launched from the escort frigates, moving slowly toward the edges of the blockade corridor. They were barely visible against the sensor wash of the nearby asteroid field, their heat signatures negligible. To a locked mind, any key looks like a weapon. On the bridge of the Iron Judgment, Krathan Marshal Valerius watched the deployment with contempt, his face etched with the scars of a dozen subjugation campaigns curled into a sneer. Drones, a child's gambit. Are they trying to annoy us into submission? His lieutenant nodded dutifully. Their signatures are minimal, Marshal. Likely sensor decoys to probe our targeting resolution. Valerius waved a dismissive hand, the gesture sharp and final. Let them play their games. Their time is running out. Hold the line. Fire on the lead freighter the instant the timer expires. The countdown dipped below 30 minutes. Rostova watched the drone dispersal pattern, a complex, blooming lattice spreading across the void. Each drone was a node, a single point in a much larger design. Archie, confirm lattice geometry, she ordered. The low hum of the bridge was her only audience. Geometry is optimal, Admiral Archimedes confirmed. The nodes are in position. We have seeded the space between them and the Crathan fleet, with a low-density particle cloud too thin for their passive sensors to flag as a threat. The information was a quiet promise. This was the first mystery for the Crathan. The drones were not decoys, and the particle cloud was not chaff. Each drone housed a microscopic array of gravitic lenses and refraction crystals designed for a single purpose. Rostova was not building a shield. She was building a mirror. A reflection shows a truth you cannot deny. They're hailing us again. Admiral, the communications officer, reported her console bathing her in a soft golden light. On screen, Rostova said. Marshal Valerius's scarred face filled the display. His eyes held the flat, pitiless certainty of a true believer. Admiral Rostova, your pointless maneuvering has achieved nothing. This is your final warning. Your timer has almost expired. Order your convoy to stand down and submit, or their destruction will be the first entry on a very long list of your failures. Rostova met his gaze without blinking. Her own face, framed by severe graying hair, was a mask of calm resolve. Marshal, your ultimatum is predicated on a false assumption that your only options are to command or to destroy. There is a third option, to learn. Their doctrine was a cage. Ours was the key. Valerius laughed a harsh, grating sound. Your philosophy is a disease, Admiral. The galaxy requires order, and order is delivered through strength, not ponderous debate. You have 2 minutes to accept reality. The channel snapped shut. Kenji Tanaka's knuckles were white where he gripped his console's edge. He won't listen. He can't. The suit's internal monitors registered his heartbeat, a steady, controlled drum against the rising pressure. He doesn't have to listen, Rostova said softly. He just has to act. She turned to the fleet. All ships brace for energy discharge. Helm, advance the convoy. Full impulse. The countdown reached 0. As the last crimson digit vanished, the lead Crathan cruisers unleashed hell. Lances of pure particle energy, white-hot and absolute, tore across the void, aimed squarely at the Star Treader. It was a statement of doctrine, an execution delivered without hesitation. For a split second, the space between the fleets was incandescent, a river of manufactured suns flowing toward a helpless target. Then Rostova's trap sprang. Archie, activate the lattice, now. A shout echoes, but a mirror replies in the same voice. The moment the Crathan beams hit the seeded particle cloud, the space itself seemed to warp. The low-density particles ionized, creating a conductive pathway for the gravitic lenses on the drone network. In less than a nanosecond, the lattice flared to life, not as a shield that would absorb or break, but as a vast, invisible focusing array. The torrent of energy was caught, bent, and redirected. The Crathan crews had only a moment to register the impossible readings on their sensors. The volley they had fired had not struck its target. It had vanished from their scopes, only to reappear impossibly an instant later, hurtling back at them along the exact same path. The beams, now perfectly consolidated by the mirror lattice, struck the emitter arrays of the ships that had fired them. Explosions blossomed across the Crathan vanguard. They were not catastrophic. The ships were designed to withstand massive punishment, but the focused, returned energy overloaded their primary weapon systems with surgical precision. Emitter shrouds melted. Power conduits flashed into vapor. The front line of the Crathan fleet, the very teeth of their ultimatum, had been disarmed by its own bite. A stunned silence fell over the Vigilance's bridge. The only sound was the faint hiss of the coolant systems cycling. Then Kenji let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a full minute. Gods. It worked. The cost, however, was not zero. One of the Crathan destroyers, firing a fraction of a second off-axis from its fellows, had its beam only partially redirected. The deflected energy, a searing whip of plasma, lashed out and caught the UNF frigate steadfast across its dorsal shields. Alarms blared on the tactical display. Damage report, Rostova snapped. Steadfast reports shields buckled at 40%, Archie relayed instantly. Minor hull scoring along sections 7 and 8. Medical reports, 3 crew with flash burns from a conduit overload. They are alive. The ship remains combat effective. Rostova's expression tightened. 3 wounded. A price paid in flesh for a lesson taught in light. It was a cost she accepted, but never lightly. The ledger acknowledges every debt. Their vanguard is neutralized, Admiral Kenji reported, his voice sharp with adrenaline. Primary weapons are offline. They're holding position. They seem confused. Confusion precedes education, Rostova murmured. She turned to her communications officer. Open a fleet-wide channel. No encryption. I want Valerius to hear this, but I want his entire fleet to understand it. Her voice, when it came, was as cold and clear as the space between stars. This is Admiral Rostova of the United Nations Fleet. Your initial attack has been returned to you. We have not fired a single shot. The choice to escalate was yours, and the immediate consequence was yours to bear. She paused, letting the silence hang in the void. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. We have logged your unprovoked assault. We have also logged our response. The convoy will now proceed. Stand down, or the next lesson will be more severe. You cannot threaten a people whose strength is patience. On the iron judgment, Valerius stared at his tactical plot, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His vanguard was crippled, disarmed by physics and philosophy. His doctrine had failed its first, most basic test. The human ships had not even powered their main weapons. They mocked us, he snarled, slamming a fist down on his command throne. They used our own strength to humiliate us. He would not stand for it. His entire career, his entire civilization was built on the principle that overwhelming force was the ultimate truth. This could not be allowed to stand. All remaining ships, he roared, his voice shaking with rage. Advance. Encircle them. Use the asteroid field to pin them down. We will grind them into dust with short-range fire if we must. I want that convoy turned to ash, and that flagship's command deck vented to space. They sought a battle, so we gave them a classroom. The Krathan fleet, shamed and enraged, began to move. Their cruisers and frigates surged forward, flanking the human formation and driving them back toward the dense, swirling asteroids of the Aegis Belt. It was a classic pincer movement, a brute force maneuver designed to negate tactical finesse and turn the engagement into a brawl. On the Vigilance's display, the Krathan icons formed 2 massive arms preparing to crush the smaller human fleet against the unyielding anvil of the asteroid field. Admiral, they're boxing us in, stated the observation, obvious but necessary. Their intent is clear. They mean to force a close-range engagement where our lattice is ineffective. I am aware, Exo Rostova replied, her eyes tracing the enemy's vectors. She seemed utterly calm, a rock in the swirling tide of war. Archie are the secondary assets in place. Affirmative, Admiral, the AI responded. Phase 2 assets are deployed and awaiting activation. The Krathan fleet is entering the designated engagement zone now. This was the second mystery seeded long before the first shot was ever returned. The retreat toward the asteroids was not a retreat at all. It was an invitation. Aboard a small hydroponics bay on the colony of Viridian 4, a technician named Reese watched the public fleet display with his daughter. The icons on the screen were a complex dance of light. The red Krathan symbols were swarming the blue UN icons, pushing them into the gray swirl of the asteroid belt. Are they losing, Papa? The girl asked, her voice small. Reese put a hand on her shoulder. No, sweet pea, he said softly. They're just letting the other kids set up the board. Admiral Rostova always lets them think they chose the game. He was right. Valerius believed he was closing a trap. In reality, he was walking into one. The asteroids were not an anvil. They were the lock. "They've taken the bait," Rostova said, a flicker of something like grim satisfaction in her eyes. "Their forward elements have crossed the threshold." She stood, her hands clasped behind her back, a picture of absolute command. "Kenji, you have the con. Execute. A predator's teeth are only a threat if you stand in front of them. All ships execute maneuver Epsilon 9, Kenji's voice rang with authority. "Signal the drone net. Activate Phase 2. Now!" The human fleet, which had been in a tight defensive posture, suddenly broke apart with breathtaking speed and precision. Cruisers and destroyers pivoted on their axes, their main drives flaring as they scattered in pre-calculated vectors. It looked like a panicked, disorganized rout. To Marshal Valerius, it was the beginning of the end for the humans, the final, desperate flight before annihilation. He was wrong. It was the door of the cage swinging shut behind him, as the human ships scattered the space they had just occupied came alive. From the shadows of the asteroids, hundreds of previously hidden drones and repurposed mirror nodes flared into existence. They did not fire weapons. They projected a complex, overlapping web of gravitic distortions and high-fidelity sensor ghosts. The empty space the Krathen were surging into was suddenly flooded with the signatures of a massive phantom human fleet. A trap is only a trap if you do not see the walls. On the bridge of the Iron Judgment, chaos erupted. Marshal multiple new contacts, hundreds of them. They were hiding in the belt. An officer screamed. Valerius stared at his tactical display, which had become a nightmare of false readings. His automated targeting systems designed for brutal efficiency were overwhelmed. They tried to lock onto the phantom ships, but the gravitic distortions bent their sensor waves, reflecting them back in a disorienting cascade. The Krathen fleet, charging forward at full combat speed, tried to react. Captains shouted contradictory orders. Ships tried to swerve to engage the ghost targets, their formations breaking apart. The precise pincer movement devolved into a frantic scramble. And in that scramble, their own targeting systems, desperate to find a lock in the sensor-choked space, began to find the only clear targets available each other. "Archie analysis," Rostova commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "The Krathen fleet is experiencing systemic targeting failure." The AI reported, his tone perfectly even. "The gravitic lensing is creating a recursive feedback loop in their fire control systems. They are interpreting their own wingmen as primary threats. The kill box has been inverted, Admiral. They are now their own enemy. The most efficient weapon is your enemy's own doctrine." Rostova watched the Krathen icons on the map flash yellow, then red, as automated point defense cannons and secondary batteries began to fire. Not at her ships, which were now holding safe positions on the far side of the Phantom Zone, but at their own comrades. Short-range plasma bursts, meant for human hulls, slammed into Krathen shields. It was not a decisive battle, but it was chaos. It was panic. It was a lesson. Valerius, his face pale with shock and rage, saw what was happening. He saw the trap he had so eagerly sprung was now his prison. "Cease fire," he bellowed. "All ships cease automated fire. Override your systems. Override them now." But it was too late. His doctrine of absolute automated aggression had turned on him. His fleet was too rigid, its systems too efficient at destruction, to adapt to a battle where the enemy was nowhere and everywhere at once. The human ships simply watched their weapons cold, their engines idling, as the Krathen hegemony's mighty fleet tore itself apart from the inside. A blade that only cuts forward cannot defend its wielder. The convoy, the original object of the entire confrontation, was already clear of the blockade zone. It was coasting safely toward Viridian 4, its precious cargo secure. The timer on Rostova's screen was gone, replaced by a live feed from the colony's surface, where tiny lights were beginning to gather in public spaces, their inhabitants watching the silent, distant starlight of the battle, knowing they were safe. The human fleet held its position, a ring of silent judges watching a self-inflicted wound. They did not need to fire. The Krathan doctrine was a fire that, if contained, would burn itself out. The space between the fleets shimmered with wasted energy and the ghosts of ships that were never there. Hull plating on several Krathan cruisers glowed cherry red from friendly fire. "Marshal Valerius is hailing us," the comms officer said, her voice laced with awe. "He is demanding our surrender." Rostova allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "Of course he is." She looked at Kenji, at the relieved but resolute faces of her bridge crew, at the steady blue icons of her fleet holding the line. They hadn't won by breaking the enemy. They had won by showing the enemy how to break themselves. The first part of the lesson was over. The second was about to begin. Their arrogance built the walls. Our patience built the gate. "Put him through," Rostova commanded. Valerius's face appeared again, no longer contemptuous, but contorted with a furious, desperate denial. "This trickery changes nothing, Rostova. You are still trapped. My fleet will regain control, and when we do, we will show you no mercy." The words were loud, but the foundation beneath them had cracked. He was speaking to his own crew as much as to her. Rostova's expression was unreadable, her calm, a stark contrast to his fury. "Marshal, look at your fleet. You are firing on your own ships. Your doctrine has failed." This is the point in the lesson where the student can choose to accept the new data, or they can double down on their failed hypothesis. The choice, as always, is yours. The hull of the Vigilance gave a low groan as the inertial dampeners adjusted to a minor course correction, a sound that seemed to punctuate her statement. "We have made no hostile action against you since your initial volley was returned," she continued. "We are holding our position. The space you occupy is one of your own making. You may leave it at any time. This is the cost of the closed fist you cannot let go." Valerius stared, his mind clearly struggling to process a reality that his entire life had taught him was impossible. He had been outmaneuvered not by superior firepower, but by superior logic. He had been defeated by an idea. "This is not over," he snarled and cut the connection. But the threat was hollow. The Krathan fleet was in disarray, its command structure shattered by confusion, and its ships damaged by their own automated systems. "He will not stand down," Admiral Kenji said quietly, stepping closer to her command chair. "His pride won't allow it. He'll rally his ships and come at us again, this time with manual overrides." The faint scent of recycled oxygen seemed sharper, now charged with anticipation. "I know," Rostova replied. "But he will be doing it with a damaged fleet and a demoralized officer corps. He is no longer fighting to win. He is fighting to not be seen losing." She turned her gaze back to the tactical display, where the chaos among the Krathan fleet was slowly beginning to subside as captains regained manual control. "Archie, project the probable vectors for their next assault." The AI overlaid a new set of lines on the map, converging desperate attack runs. "Their most probable strategy is now a full commitment charge, Admiral. They will ignore losses and attempt to overwhelm us by sheer mass. A lesson ignored becomes a reckoning." Rostova nodded slowly. The first phase had been elegant, a redirect of energy. The second had been subtle, a trap of perception. The third would have to be decisive. The time for indirect lessons was over. Now she had to teach them about consequences. Now the ledger had to be balanced in a way even Marshal Valerius could not ignore. She drew a deep breath, the weight of command settling on her shoulders. The lives of her crew, the fate of the colony, the very principle they fought for at all rested on this next decision. The Krathan had been offered an open hand. They had slapped it away. Now they would see what that hand, when closed, was capable of holding back. "All ships," she said, her voice resonating with a new, harder edge. "Prepare for direct engagement. Bring main batteries online." We offered them a mirror to see themselves. Now we will show them a wall they cannot breach. The bridge crew moved with quiet, focused efficiency, their movements a reflection of their admiral's resolve. The gentle blue glow of the displays intensified as weapon systems were powered up. The ship itself seeming to take a deeper breath before the plunge. They chose the hammer ignorant of the anvil. The Krathan fleet began to reform, their movements sluggish and wounded, but driven by a core of furious resolve. On the main view screen, their damaged vanguard pulled back while the heavier, undamaged cruisers moved to the front. It was the lumbering, deliberate motion of a wounded beast preparing for a final, desperate charge. Marshal Valerius's voice, now stripped of all pretense and burned down to pure, hardened rage, crackled across the Krathan command channels, audible even on open frequencies. Discipline formation, manual targeting protocols. "We will advance as one fist and crush this human anomaly. There will be no more tricks, only retribution." A vow made in anger is a promise to a fool. On the Vigilance, Rostova watched the enemy consolidate. Her own fleet was a picture of calm readiness, a constellation of disciplined blue lights against the void. "He's committing his entire force," Kenji observed, his voice low and steady. "No reserves, no retreat vector. This is a death ride." The subtle vibration under their feet shifted as the ship's primary energy conduits rerouted power to the main batteries, a deep thrum that was more felt than heard. "He believes it is his only remaining option," Rostova said. "His doctrine has left him with no other tools. When your only truth is the hammer, every problem that cannot be smashed feels like a personal insult." She turned from the screen to face her command crew. "He thinks this will be a brawl. He is expecting us to meet his charge with one of our own. We will not. A wall does not need to charge, it only needs to hold." Archie Rostova continued, her tone crisp and decisive. "Deploy the final assets. Slave their core programming to my command mark, and begin the broadcast. Sector-wide, no encryption. Title the feed, The Aegis Ledger." Admiral Archimedes interjected, his baritone voice holding a statistically calculated note of caution. "A public broadcast of this nature is unprecedented. It will reveal tactical positions and energy states to any observer, including potential Krathan sympathizers. The calculated risk to fleet integrity is 17%. Here, it was the triangle of conflict laid bare. The AI's logic, the Krathan's brute force, and her own moral line. "The risk is noted." Archie Rostova replied without hesitation, her gaze unwavering. "But the lesson must be public. This isn't about winning a battle. It's about ending a philosophy. The entire sector needs to see the true price of an ultimatum. Proceed." Her command was absolute, the final step in her arc from restraint to righteous decisiveness. "The account will be settled for all to see." On Viridian 4, the colonists watched the live feed now titled The Aegis Ledger. The display was split. One side showed the tactical map, the angry red mass of the Krathan fleet beginning its inexorable advance. The other side was blank, a simple header and a running chronometer. In the colony's main assembly hall, a silence fell over the crowd. They were no longer just the stakes in this conflict. They were the witnesses. A young boy held his father's hand, his eyes wide. "They're coming back," he whispered. "It's okay," his father replied, his voice tight. "The Admiral has a plan. She always has a plan." The Krathan fleet surged forward, a wave of steel and plasma. They fired as they came, massive, uncoordinated volleys of energy designed to saturate space and overwhelm shields. It was a storm of raw power, terrifying in its scale. The human fleet met the charge, but not like a shield wall. They scattered, breaking into smaller, agile squadrons. They danced at the edge of the Krythan advance, a swarm of silver hornets against a charging bull. Never fight an avalanche. Redirect the stones. Squadron Gamma, execute Strike Vector 7. Target the lead cruiser's port drive. Kenji's voice was a sharp, clear instrument on the command net. Squadron Delta, deploy, countermeasures, and draw their fire. We are hurting them. Keep them focused forward. The Vigilance itself executed a sharp burn, its lateral thrusters groaning in protest, as it slid sideways to avoid a volley of plasma torpedoes. The heat from the near miss washed over the ship's sensors, a phantom warmth that made the bridge crew's skin prickle. The battle became a blur of controlled, violent motion. UNF destroyers would dart in, deliver a precise, crippling blow to a Krythan ship's sensors or engines, and then vanish back into the chaos. The Krythan, blinded by rage and their own rigid formation, could only plow forward their massive guns, unable to track the nimble human ships. But the fight was not without cost. A Krythan frigate, its command crew, ignoring the failing automated systems and targeting, manually scored a lucky hit on the UNF Dauntless. A lance of particle energy tore through its aft shields and slammed into the engine housing. On the Vigilance's tactical display, the Dauntless's icon flashed a harsh warning yellow. "Dauntless is hit," an officer called out. "Heavy damage to the primary drive. They're venting plasma. A debt paid in steel is still a debt. Vigilance to Dauntless, report." Rostova's voice cut through the comms chatter, her calm unwavering. The reply came back strained but defiant. "This is Captain Singh. We have the drive bleed contained, Admiral. We're on emergency power, but our batteries are still hot. We can still fight." "Negative," Captain Rostova ordered. "Your duty is done. Get your crew to the emergency bulkheads and prepare for evac. We will hold the line." She made a minute gesture to Kenji, a signal he understood instantly. Two other frigates broke from the fight and moved to shield the wounded Dauntless, their hulls physically interposing themselves between it and the ongoing battle. It was a testament to their ethos: no one gets left behind. The Krythan, sensing a kill, tried to press their advantage. But the human fleet tightened its dance, their movements becoming more aggressive, more precise. They were subtly, expertly forcing the charging Krythan ships closer together. The Krythan captains, desperate to maintain a unified front, complied without realizing they were being manipulated. Their broad assault wave was being compressed, funneled into a dense, packed column. Valerius on his bridge saw only a successful advance. He did not see the walls of the trap closing in. A leader who only looks forward will not see the pit at his feet. "They are in the optimal zone," Admiral Archie announced. "The herd is gathered. The Krythan fleet's density is now critical." Rostova's eyes were cold, her face set like stone. "Then it's time to close the gate." She looked at the blank half of the Aegis ledger feed. "Archie, populate the ledger. Make it live. Now." The blank screen on the public feed suddenly filled with data. It was a clean, horrifyingly simple list. Every ship in the Krythan fleet was named. Beside each name was a number the crew complement. And beside that, a new rapidly updating metric: internal temperature. Every single one was climbing. "Activate the projectors," Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper. "When a door is closed, the pressure must go somewhere." From hundreds of hidden drones from the flagship itself and from the repurposed mirror nodes, a new force emerged. It was not a weapon that fired a beam or a projectile. It was a focused, overwhelming projection of gravitic force. Not a wall to stop the Krythan, but a vice to hold them. The charging Krythan fleet, already packed tightly together, suddenly found its momentum arrested. Not by a collision, but by the very fabric of space-time thickening around them. On the bridge of the Iron Judgment, alarms screamed. "Marshal, our engines are redlining. We're not moving, but the drives are still firing at full power." An engineer shrieked. Valerius stared at his view screen. His fleet was trapped, held immobile in a bubble of distorted gravity. They were packed so tightly that their own engine wash was cooking the ships behind them. The heat had nowhere to go. Assumed. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Rostova had not attacked them. She had simply held them. She had used their own unstoppable charge, their own single-minded aggression, and turned it into a self-immolating prison. They were being destroyed by their own power, by their own refusal to stop. The ultimatum had been reversed. Rostova's voice now broadcast on the same channel as the Aegis Ledger, her words reaching every ship in both fleets, the colony below, and countless worlds across the sector. This is Admiral Rostova. Marshal Valerius, your fleet is caught in a gravity well of our design. Your ships are unable to dissipate the heat from your own engines. I have not fired upon you. I am simply holding you accountable for the energy you are expending. The ledger on the screen was a cascade of rising numbers. The internal temperatures were climbing past safe limits, turning from green to yellow, and now for the ships in the center of the formation, to a terrifying red. A new column appeared on the ledger, timed to reactor breach. It was a countdown. You have demanded surrender or destruction. Rostova continued, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a profound, weary gravity. I will offer you neither. I am offering you a choice. Order your fleet to execute an emergency shutdown of all primary drive systems. Power down your ships. If you do, we will release the gravity field and offer medical and engineering assistance to your crews. If you do not, your reactors will breach and you will have executed your own men. The entire sector is watching. The choice is yours. A reckoning is not a punishment. It is the final sum of your choices. On the Iron Judgment. Valerius was frozen. His bridge was a cacophony of panicked shouts and blaring alarms. He looked at the ledger broadcast on his own main screen. He saw the names of his ships, his captains, the thousands of crewmen under his command. He saw the countdowns next to their names, some now under 5 minutes. He saw the truth of his doctrine laid bare for the universe to witness. It was a suicide pact. Marshal, you must give the order, his first officer pleaded, his face slick with sweat from the rising heat on their own bridge. We are dying. The console in front of him sparked a jet of acrid smoke filling the air. Valerius stared at Rostova's calm, unyielding face on the comms panel. She was not gloating. She was waiting. She had given him the ultimate responsibility. His ultimatum, his fist had been closed around his own throat. For a long, agonizing moment, his pride warred with reality. To give the order was to admit utter humiliating defeat. To refuse was to commit mass murder. The first ship on the ledger, the cruiser Implacable, flashed a critical warning. Time to reactor breach 000059. That broke him. The marshal's face, a mask of fury for so long, finally crumbled into something that looked like despair. He raised a trembling hand. All ships. He choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. All ships. Emergency shutdown. Kill the drives. Kill them now. A doctrine is only as strong as the truth it can withstand. Across the Krathan fleet, the blinding glare of engine cones sputtered and died. The immense pressure of their combined thrust vanished. The silence was more profound than any explosion. On the Aegis Ledger, the temperature readings stabilized, then began to slowly tick down. The countdowns to reactor breach vanished. Rostova watched for a moment, ensuring the stand-down was real. Then she nodded to her crew. Release the field, she ordered. The unseen pressure on the Krathan fleet evaporated. They were left drifting, a fleet of silent, powerless ghosts. Signal the assistance teams, she said. Priority 1 is medical aid for the crews in the central formation. Priority 2 is reactor stabilization. The UNF frigates that had been shielding the Dauntless now moved forward, their running lights switching to the gentle, pulsing green of non-combat assistance. Kenji stepped beside her, his face a mixture of relief and awe. "It's over. The battle is over," Rostova corrected him gently. "The lesson is just beginning." She watched as the small, nimble human ships moved among the colossal, crippled forms of the Krathan fleet, not as conquerors, but as medics and engineers. They were opening the hand they had been forced to close. An open hand can offer aid as easily as it can wield a weapon. In the days that followed, the Aegis Ledger became the most studied document in recent galactic history. The Krathan hegemony, its military pride shattered, and its brutal doctrine exposed as a catastrophic failure, was forced into negotiations by its own populace. The Ultimatum doctrine was publicly renounced. A formal notice was posted on the sector's public registers, a simple declarative statement that echoed across the stars. By the terms of the Aegis Accord, the practice of military ultimatums is hereby classified as an act of systemic self-endangerment and is proscribed from all diplomatic and military conduct. The ledger is now closed. Rostova stood on the observation deck of the Vigilance, watching her fleet manage the long, slow process of Krathan withdrawal. The convoy was safely docked at Viridian 4, its cargo being unloaded to a world that would now have a future. Her ship was quiet, the only sound, the low, steady hum of its life support systems. The mirror arrays their work done had cooled to a dull, unassuming pewter, their brilliant silver sheen gone until it was needed again. They had not set out to destroy an enemy, only a flawed and dangerous idea. They had held a mirror up to a clenched fist, forcing it to see its own reflection, forcing it to confront the cost of its own tension. When that failed, they had anchored it, held it, until it was forced to unclench on its own. The price had been 3 wounded crewmen and 1 damaged ship. The gain was a lasting peace, not imposed by force, but demonstrated by reason. The ledger was balanced. A closed fist can hold a weapon, but it can never build a future.